Welcome to the deep dive. We've got uh, quite a stack of sources in front of us today. It's almost like a blueprint for, well, how humans tick. Our mission here is to take this dense architecture of the self and, distill it into something useful, something actionable for you. We're going deep today, covering everything from like hidden instincts and how our brains are wired to the cognitive traps we fall into, and really importantly, how we navigate relationships and conflict.
That's a great way to put it, because when you look across all these sources, foundational psychology, neuroscience, relationship studies, there's this core tension, right? It's this gap between who we think we are, these rational, in-control beings, and the powerful, often hidden systems that are actually running the show. Biological, cognitive, relational systems. So yeah, our goal is to pull out the nuts and bolts of self-awareness, understand these blueprints we're working from, often without even realizing it.
And we're looking at some real heavy hitters today. Festinger on why we justify ourselves, Pavlov on how we learn reflexes, Gottman on making relationships work, plus tools for healing. Because once you actually see these forces, you gain some leverage, some ability to maybe influence them.
Yeah.
So let's start with maybe the most universally frustrating one, that engine inside us that constantly justifies our actions, cognitive dissonance.
Right. The cornerstone here is Leon Festinger's theory, cognitive dissonance. And it's deceptively simple on the surface. Basically, we humans have this internal drive for consistency. We want our beliefs, our attitudes, our actions to all line up nicely. When they don't, when you believe one thing but do another, or hold two completely contradictory ideas, it creates this like psychological static tension. Festinger called this dissonance. And it's not just a mild annoyance. It's a fundamental, pretty uncomfortable feeling.
Okay, so it's less like a philosophical puzzle and more like a basic drive. Almost like being hungry or thirsty. It demands to be resolved, and the brain just jumps into gear, rationalizing to get back to comfort, even if the rationalization is, well, kind of flimsy.
Precisely. It's a drive state. And Festinger showed it's pretty much unavoidable whenever you make a decision. Think about it. Anytime you choose option A over option B, you instantly create dissonance. Why? Because you have to ignore all the good things about option B, the one you just rejected. And that conflict, that little bit of maybe I should have picked B, creates discomfort that needs reducing.
I remember reading about what makes that feeling stronger or weaker. It makes sense that, more conflicting ideas equals more dissonance. But the part about rewards and punishments, that was interesting.
Yeah, that's a crucial twist. The amount of discomfort, the magnitude, it scales with how many dissonant thoughts you have and how important they are to you. That makes sense. But, and this is key, the strength of any external reward or punishment is inversely related to the dissonance you feel inside. So if someone forces you to do something you disagree with, but they offer a huge reward, you actually feel less internal dissonance.
Wait, hang on. Less dissonance with a big reward. Why?
Because you have an easy out, you can justify the action externally. You tell yourself, well, I only did that because they paid me a ton, or I had to do it. The pressure was immense. The external reason explains away the internal conflict.
Ah, okay. That clicks now. And this is where that famous, really classic experiment comes in, is it? The one where people had to lie about a boring task.
Exactly. The peg-turning study. It's a cornerstone. Students did this incredibly dull task, just turning pegs on a board. Mind-numbing. Afterwards, the researchers asked them to tell the next participant that the task was actually really fun and interesting. Basically, to lie. Now, one group got paid $20, which was a decent amount back then, to tell this lie. The other group, they only got paid $1, a trivial amount.
Wait, $20 versus $1 to tell the same lie.
Right. Later, the researchers went back to those original students and asked them, okay, honestly, how much did you actually enjoy that peg-turning task?
Yeah.
And here's the kicker. The group paid only $1 reported genuinely enjoying the task significantly more than the group paid $20.
That sounds completely backwards. Why would getting paid less make you believe the lie more?
Because of dissonance. The $20 group had a strong external justification. Yeah, I lied, but hey, $20 is $20. Low dissonance. They didn't need to change their internal belief about the task being boring, but the $1 group, they had almost no external justification. They lied for practically nothing. This creates huge dissonance. I lied for $1. That makes me look kind of foolish.
Yeah.
Unless the task wasn't actually that boring, maybe it was kind of interesting. To reduce that uncomfortable feeling of having lied for no good reason, they unconsciously changed their attitude towards the task. They convinced themselves.
Wow, that's huge. It implies that the things we sacrifice the most for, or endure the most pain for initially, we end up being the most committed to, because our brains have worked the hardest to justify that initial cost. And this leads right into that post-decision bias, doesn't it? Once I'm locked in, my brain starts playing defense.
Absolutely. The moment the choice is made, the dissonance reduction machine kicks into high gear. And it does this through basically cognitive distortion. We bend reality a bit. We systematically start to inflate the attractiveness of the thing we chose. We focus on all its good points, and simultaneously, we actively downplay or find flaws in the options we didn't choose. We build this retroactive confidence to make ourselves feel better about the path taken.
Which has big implications for how we take in new information, right? If new facts contradict my choice, my brain sees them as like hostile invaders.
That's the direct link to information processing. We aren't passive sponges for facts. We actively seek out information that confirms our choices. Consonant information, they call it. News articles, friends who agree with us. And we just as actively avoid, dismiss, ignore, or rationalize away information that would increase our dissonance. It's not necessarily conscious or malicious, it's just a built-in defense mechanism against feeling bad about our choices.
You mentioned a really stark example of this earlier, involving smoking and health risks.
Yes, the studies on smokers were quite revealing. Consistently, research found that people who smoked more heavily were significantly less likely to believe the established scientific link between smoking and lung cancer. Think about the dissonance there. If you fully accept smoking causes fatal cancer and you know, I smoke 2 packs a day, that's an incredibly painful conflict to live with. So the easier path, psychologically, isn't always quitting. Sometimes it's rejecting the evidence. Oh, those studies are flawed, or my grandpa smoked till he was 90. You reduce the dissonance by attacking the conflicting belief, not the behavior.
That's a powerful defense mechanism. It's one thing to justify buying the wrong car, quite another to justify something potentially lethal.
And this internal pressure isn't just an individual thing, it can drive group behavior too. If a belief held by a group is strongly challenged by reality, like a prophecy failing, and the dissonance is too much for individuals to handle alone, Festinger and others observe this can actually lead to increased proselytizing. The group becomes more fervent, trying to convert outsiders.
Wait, so instead of admitting they were wrong, they double down and try to convince more people.
Exactly. Because if they can get more people to believe, it provides social validation for their original, now challenged belief. It shores up their conviction and reduces that shared dissonance. Each new convert is like a piece of evidence that they weren't wrong after all.
So social support acts like a buffer, a kind of cognitive security blanket for our beliefs.
It absolutely does. Talking with people who agree with us, who've made similar choices, it feels good. It provides affirmation, validates our reasoning, and smooths over those dissonant edges. It's why, after making a big life decision, changing careers, moving cities, whatever, people often find themselves gravitating towards others who've made the same choice. It reinforces the decision.
Okay, so that's the mind's justification system. Now let's shift gears and look at the architecture of action itself. So much of what we do is automatic, right? Habits. And that automation gets built through sheer repetition. This brings us into neuroscience and Hebb's law.
Right. Donald Hebb gave us this foundational principle for how learning physically happens in the brain. It's often boiled down to that catchy phrase, neurons that fire together wire together. What he was describing is something called long-term potentiation, or LTP. It's basically the strengthening of the connections, the synapses between neurons when they're active around the same time. Every time you repeat an action or thought pattern, you're literally making that specific neural circuit stronger, more efficient. You're carving a path.
And the crucial thing here you mentioned isn't getting it perfect every time. It's just doing it.
Yeah.
Volume over virtuosity.
Exactly. Habit formation is about the behavior becoming progressively more automatic through repetition. Not necessarily high skill or perfect form right away, it's about getting the reps in. That consistency literally causes the brain to reorganize. That pathway gets myelinated, it fires faster, requires less conscious effort. Eventually, it moves from your thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, down into the basal ganglia, the habit center. It goes on autopilot.
Which totally explains why breaking a bad habit feels like pushing against a physical force. You're literally fighting against established, reinforced wiring in your brain. So if repetition builds the habit pathway, what's the most effective way to dismantle it?
Well, one of the most powerful strategies comes from inverting the principles of habit formation. If habits are often triggered by cues in our environment, then the inversion of the first law is make the cue invisible. If you remove the trigger, hide the cookies, turn off the notifications, change your route home to avoid the bar there, the habit loop doesn't get initiated. The neurons don't fire together. And over time, without that repeated firing, the connection, the potentiation, actually weakens. It's called long-term depression, the opposite of LTP. So changing your environment is often way more effective than just relying on willpower.
We see this deep wiring reflected even in the early work on conditioning, like Pavlov's experiments with dogs. His work wasn't just about drooling. It showed how incredibly plastic the brain is, how it can manage both excitement and inhibition.
Yeah, Pavlov's work went way beyond salivating dogs. He demonstrated that the cortex, the higher brain, is remarkably adaptable. The same brain area could become a source of excitation, like alertness, readiness, or it could become a source of inhibition, suppression, rest, depending entirely on the conditions he set up. He actually identified specific kinds of stimuli that could trigger widespread inhibition across the cortex. Basically, situations where the brain decides to put the brakes on, either to protect itself or to conserve energy.
What were those triggers? They seem really relevant to how we react to the world.
He found three main types. First, monotonous, weak stimuli. Think of something just droning on and on. This triggers inhibition to basically give the cortical cells a rest. It's like boredom leading to drowsiness. The brain's saying, okay, nothing important here, shutting down processing. Second, really strong stimuli, things that are overwhelming, painful, maybe terrifying. These trigger what he called a reflex of passive self-defense. This is the neurological basis of shock, freezing, immobility. The brain inhibits action as a protective measure, like an animal playing dead.
Right, the classic freeze response. If you can't fight or flee, shut down and hope the danger passes.
Exactly. And the third type was unusual stimuli, something completely novel or unexpected. This triggers a kind of cautious inhibition, a reflex of caution. The brain pauses immediate action because the usual responses might be wrong or dangerous in this new situation. It buys time for assessment. So inhibition isn't just the absence of action, it's an active, often protective brain state.
But even with all that plasticity, Pavlov's work also showed just how stubborn these learned patterns can be.
Yeah.
Once they're really ingrained, right, they become part of our history.
Oh, absolutely. That's the other side of the coin. He did these incredibly detailed studies using what are called trace-conditioned reflexes. This is where the signal, like a bell, rings and stops before the reward, like food, appears. The animal has to hold the memory, the trace of the signal. In one famous case, they conditioned a dog with a specific trace reflex, a sound followed by food after a delay, and they repeated this pairing 994 times over nearly 2 years.
Wow, almost 1,000 repetitions. What happened?
It created this incredibly persistent response delay. The dog wouldn't start salivating until about 20 or 25 seconds after the sound stopped, matching the learned delay. That pathway was deeply carved. And here's the amazing part. Even when the researchers later changed the rules and presented the food immediately with the sound, trying to reinforce a faster response, the dog still waited the old 20-25 seconds before salivating. The deeply ingrained historical pattern completely overrode the current reality of reinforcement. It just shows how incredibly persistent, deeply learned behaviors can be.
That flows perfectly into motivation then. If behaviors get so wired, where does conscious effort and drive come from? For a long time, the standard model was Skinner's behaviorism, rewards and punishments. But then you have thinkers like Daniel Pink arguing for something more intrinsic.
Yeah, Pink's work, particularly in Drive, really challenged the dominance of that external reward-punishment model, which he called Motivation 2.0. He argues that for tasks that require creativity, complexity, conceptual thinking, basically, most modern knowledge work, those if-then rewards don't just fail to motivate, they can actually harm performance. He posits that humans have a powerful third drive, Motivation 3.0, which is intrinsic. It's this innate desire we have to direct our own lives, autonomy, to get better at things that matter, mastery, and to connect to something larger than ourselves, purpose. And this type I behavior, driven by intrinsic factors, emerges naturally when the conditions are right.
And those conditions involve autonomy, specifically. He broke that down with the 4 T's, right?
That's right. He argued that true autonomy, the kind that fuels intrinsic motivation, needs to cover 4 key aspects of work. People need autonomy over their task, what they actually do, having some choice in their projects. Over their time when they do it, allowing for flexibility. Over their technique, how they do it, giving them freedom to choose their methods. And over their team, who they do it with, allowing input on collaborators. When you give people real control over these 4 T's, Pink argues, you unlock that powerful third drive. Micromanage any of them, and it tends to wither.
Okay, so Pink emphasizes self-direction, mastery, purpose. But this seems to clash pretty directly with Skinner's whole view, doesn't it? Skinner essentially argued that attributing behavior to some internal self or drive was just an illusion we cling to. He challenged the idea of human dignity itself.
It's a fundamental disagreement, absolutely. Skinner's point was that the amount of credit or dignity we give someone for their actions is inversely proportional to how obvious the external causes are. If someone does something good because they were clearly paid or forced to, we don't admire them much. But if someone acts bravely or creatively and we can't see the external strings, we attribute it to their inner character, their autonomous self. We give them dignity.
But Skinner said if we develop a sophisticated enough science of behavior, what he called a technology of behavior, we can trace all the external causes, the environmental history, the genetic predispositions. And if we can do that,
Then the autonomous man disappears. The credit vanishes. It all gets attributed back to the environment and history. And Skinner argued that this is why people resist a scientific analysis of behavior so fiercely. They're defending the illusion that allows for praise, blame, admiration, the very concept of dignity.
that's a deeply unsettling idea. If he's right, it sort of undermines the basis for personal responsibility and striving, doesn't it?
It's profoundly challenging. But maybe the way to bridge Pink and Skinner isn't to choose one, but to synthesize. Pink's type motivation doesn't have to be some magical internal spirit. It could be understood as the result of a specific set of environmental conditions, namely the autonomy provided by the 4 T's. So Skinner might be right that the causes are ultimately external, rooted in conditioning and environment. But Pink identifies the specific type of environment that allows human potential for complex, creative work to flourish best in an environment that feels like internal control. The dignity might arise from operating effectively within that optimal environment.
This hidden architecture we're mapping out, it definitely extends into our most personal lives, our relationships, how we're wired, shapes who we're drawn to, and the conflicts we keep having. Let's dig into those relational traps, starting with what Levine and Heller call the anxious avoidant dynamic.
Right. This is such a common pattern, and it often gets set up by, ironically, common dating advice. Things like, play hard to get, don't seem too needy, be mysterious. That advice might increase your attractiveness, sure, but Levine and Heller argue it often specifically attracts an avoidant partner.
Why avoidant? What's the signal being sent?
It signals that you're willing to suppress your own needs for closeness, that you're okay with distance. The anxious avoidant trap snaps shut when one partner, the anxious one, deeply craves intimacy and reassurance, while the other partner, the avoidant one, feels smothered by it and instinctively pulls away. They have fundamentally different comfort levels with closeness, and this core disagreement can hijack almost every conversation, creating this exhausting push-pull cycle.
And the avoidant partner uses these deactivating strategies to maintain that distance, right? These aren't conscious plots, but more like unconscious self-defense mechanisms.
Exactly. They're unconsciously triggered behaviors designed to shut down attachment needs before they get too strong. One classic example they describe is fixation on a phantom ex. This is where the avoidant person keeps thinking about a past partner. Maybe someone completely wrong for them in reality, but holds them up as this idealized standard that the current partner can never meet. It effectively blocks real intimacy by keeping the past alive as a barrier.
And then there's the sudden nitpicking, finding fault with things that didn't matter before.
Yes, that's another big one. Suddenly becoming intensely bothered by trivial things, the way their partner eats, their laugh, a minor habit. These small, often irrational complaints serve as internal justifications to create emotional distance just when things might be getting closer. Oh, I can't be with someone who chews like that. It pushes the partner away and relieves the avoidant subconscious anxiety about intimacy.
This dynamic must make resolving conflict incredibly difficult, because if one person's underlying goal is actually less closeness, then resolution itself feels threatening.
You've hit the nail on the head. For someone with a secure or anxious attachment style, conflict resolution is about repairing the bond, getting closer, feeling more secure. But for someone with an avoidance style, resolution means increased closeness, which is the very thing they're trying to unconsciously manage or avoid. So they might resist genuine resolution, they might stonewall, withdraw, deflect, or minimize the issue. The conflict doesn't get resolved because resolving it would lead to an unwanted outcome. Deeper intimacy.
Okay, so that's the trap. Let's bring in John Gottman's work now, which offers more of a roadmap for building resilience despite these dynamics. He talks a lot about bids for connection.
Yes, Gottman's research is fantastic here. A core concept is turning toward. A bid is basically any attempt, verbal or nonverbal, to get your partner's attention, affirmation, or connection. It could be a sigh, asking a question, pointing something out, trying to make a joke, reaching out to touch them. Relationships that thrive, Gottman found, are those where partners consistently notice these bids and make a choice to turn toward them, engage with the bid. The opposite is turning away, ignoring it, or turning against, responding with hostility or sarcasm. Things like being distracted, stressed, or holding on to resentment make us miss or reject these crucial little moments of connection, these micro repairs.
And sometimes the bid isn't packaged nicely, right? It might come out as criticism or complaint, but we still need to see the underlying attempt to connect.
Absolutely. The delivery might be clumsy or even hostile, like you never take the trash out. The surface is criticism, but the underlying bid might be, I feel overwhelmed and need help, or I feel like we're not a team on this. Recognizing that underlying need beneath the potentially poor delivery and choosing to respond to that, turning toward the need, not just reacting to the criticism, that's a master skill in relationships.
So turning toward bids is key. What did Gottman identify as the cornerstone for actually resolving the conflicts themselves, especially the ones that keep coming back?
The absolute cornerstone is accepting influence. This is crucial for compromise. Gottman's research overwhelmingly showed that stable, happy relationships require both partners to be genuinely open to considering the other's perspective and allowing it to influence their own position. You simply cannot resolve conflict if you walk in thinking, I'm right, you're wrong, and I just need to convince you. You have to be willing to say, okay, help me understand your point of view, and be genuinely open to shifting, even a little. It starts with basic respect for your partner's perspective.
And for those big recurring arguments, the ones about money or chores or sex that never seem to go away, Gottman said they're usually not about the surface topic.
Right. He called those perpetual problems. He found that about 69% of relationship conflicts fall into this category. They're based on fundamental differences in personality, values, or upbringing that aren't likely to disappear. The argument about spending money isn't really about the dollars and cents. It's often about the symbolic meaning underneath. For one partner, money might symbolize security, control, stability. For the other, it might mean pleasure, freedom, generosity. You don't necessarily solve these perpetual problems. Instead, successful couples learn to manage them by understanding and honoring the deeper symbolic dreams or values embedded in each person's position, even if they don't fully agree with them. They find ways to accommodate both sets of needs.
Okay, we've looked at how the self justifies, how it automates action, how it connects or fails to connect. For this last section, let's look at some tools for maybe intervening in these processes, starting with something really deep: trauma and the body.
Yeah. The work of people like Peter Levine, Somatic Experiencing, and Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score, has been transformative here. Their core insight is that trauma symptoms aren't primarily psychological defects. They're often the result of an incomplete biological defense response. When faced with overwhelming threat, our bodies instinctively trigger fight, flight, or freeze responses. Trauma occurs when this massive surge of survival energy gets mobilized but then gets stuck. It's not allowed to complete its action or discharge fully. The threat ends, but the body stays locked in that high alert state.
So the nervous system essentially gets frozen mid-action, still braced for impact or ready to run even years later. How does that trapped energy create symptoms?
That undischarged energy manifests as chronic physical tension, anxiety, hypervigilance, digestive issues, flashbacks, emotional numbness, the whole constellation of PTSD symptoms. The body's alarm system stays on because it never got the signal that the danger passed and the defensive action was successful. Crucially, brain structures involved in memory and fear, like the amygdala and hippocampus, are deeply affected. During intense freeze responses, the hippocampus, which normally tags memories with time and context, can partially shut down. This is partly why traumatic memories can feel so timeless, so immediate, like they're happening now.
That makes sense why traditional talk therapy might sometimes stall with deep trauma. The issue isn't just in the story, it's held in the body's physiology, below the level of language. So how do we access that nonverbal level?
Through sensation and the felt sense. Levine's work emphasizes that the reptilian brain, the oldest part governing survival instincts, communicates not in words, but in raw physical sensation. Heat, cold, tightness, trembling, buzzing, expansion, contraction. Healing involves learning to gently bring awareness to these bodily sensations without judgment or trying to change them immediately. It's about carefully tracking the felt sense and allowing the body's natural, intrinsic wisdom to emerge. This might involve spontaneous movements, shaking, tears, or deep breaths, as the trapped survival energy finally finds a way to discharge and complete the cycle, allowing the nervous system to regulate. It's about befriending the body's signals.
It sounds like tapping into the body's own impulse to heal itself. There's maybe a parallel in Jungian psychology with the idea of spontaneous symbols emerging during crisis.
Yes, that's an interesting connection. Jungian analysts observe that in times of intense psychological distress or fragmentation, like children going through a difficult divorce or people experiencing severe neurosis, individuals would sometimes spontaneously draw or dream about mandalas. These are typically circular images organized around a central point. Jung interpreted this as an instinctive self-healing attempt by the psyche. In the midst of chaos and confusion, the psyche spontaneously generates this symbol of order, wholeness, and centering, trying to create a point of stability around which the fragmented parts can reorganize.
Okay, let's shift from those deep somatic and symbolic levels to a more cognitive emotional tool. Self-compassion, specifically Kristen Neff's idea of fierce self-compassion. This isn't just about being gentle, is it?
No, it's a crucial extension. Dr. Neff talks about two sides of self-compassion. The tender side is what we usually think of being kind, understanding, and comforting towards ourselves when we're suffering, soothing the pain. But the fierce side is about taking action. It's about protecting ourselves, providing for our needs, and motivating ourselves to make changes. Fierce self-compassion involves honoring our own needs, setting boundaries, and challenging things that harm us, including societal norms, like gendered expectations around self-sacrifice.
So fierce self-compassion might look like saying no more often or speaking up against unfairness or pushing ourselves to leave a bad situation. It's the action-oriented side.
Exactly. It's recognizing that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself isn't just gentle acceptance, but assertive action. It requires asking, am I agreeing to this because it aligns with my values, or just because I'm afraid to disappoint someone or cause conflict? Fierce self-compassion gives us the courage to say, my needs matter too. And mindfulness is key here, being able to see the situation clearly, acknowledge the unfairness or the need for change, this isn't right, I need to protect myself, without getting completely swept away by anger or fear. That clarity fuels effective, strong action.
Okay, that's powerful. Let's wrap up with a couple of concrete cognitive tools for just making better decisions day to day, fighting against those biases we talked about earlier.
Right, we can actively deploy mental strategies to fight selection bias, where we unconsciously favor information, confirming what we already believe. One great tool is the pre-mortem. Before you finalize a big decision, imagine it's a year later and the decision has failed spectacularly. Now, brainstorm all the reasons why it failed, what went wrong. This forces you to actively look for potential flaws and weaknesses before you commit rather than after. You can then build in safeguards.
That's clever. It flips the confirmation bias on its head. You're actively searching for disconfirming evidence. What about dealing with just too many options? Barry Schwartz wrote about the paradox of choice.
Yes, the choice overload problem. Schwartz showed that while some choice is good, too much choice often leads to anxiety, paralysis, and ultimately lower satisfaction with whatever we finally choose. Our expectations get impossibly high. The key strategy isn't necessarily to find the absolute best option out of hundreds, but to manage expectations. Reduce the number of options you seriously consider, and consciously adopt the mindset of a satisficer rather than a maximizer. A maximizer feels compelled to examine every single possibility to ensure they pick the perfect one, which is exhausting and often leads to regret. Maybe that other one was slightly better. A satisficer identifies their core criteria, finds an option that meets them well enough, this is good enough, chooses it, and moves on. Paradoxically, satisficers tend to be happier with their choices.
Good enough is often better than perfect, especially when perfect takes forever to find. And that brings us to regret itself. There's that interesting finding about what we regret more over the long haul.
Right. Research consistently shows a pattern. In the short term, we tend to regret our actions that went wrong, things we did that we wish we hadn't, acts of commission, the bad investment, the awkward comment. But in the long run, looking back over years or decades, people overwhelmingly regret their inactions, the things they didn't do, acts of omission, the opportunities missed, the risks not taken, the words left unsaid. This is sometimes called the omission bias reversal. The sting of a failed action fades, but the ghost of a missed opportunity can linger. Hashtag had outro.
Well, we have certainly covered a lot of ground today, a real deep dive into this hidden architecture. We went from that internal pressure to justify ourselves with cognitive dissonance, through the actual physical wiring of habits with Hebb and Pavlov, explored the complex dance of intimacy and conflict in relationships, and ended with some powerful tools for healing through the body and making smarter choices.
Yeah, what really stands out when you pull these threads together is just how much of our experience, our suffering, our successes, our patterns is shaped by these deeply automatic structural forces. Whether it's the literal neural pathways of our habits, the attachment styles we learned early on, or the body holding on to unresolved trauma energy. So much is operating beneath conscious awareness.
So what's the takeaway? What does this all mean for us? I think it suggests that influencing these deep structures doesn't start with huge dramatic gestures. It starts with subtle shifts in attention, like paying attention to those quiet body sensations, questioning our own self-justifications before they become concrete beliefs, and making conscious choices about when to strive for the absolute best versus when good enough is actually better for our well-being.
Absolutely. And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with, building on that idea of regret. We just discussed how, in the long run, people regret the things they didn't do more than the things they did. So, knowing that your future self is likely to look back and lament the risks not taken, the experiences missed. How does acknowledging that potential future regret change how you think about uncertainty, vulnerability, and the choices you're facing right now?